And we are live with Altered Moments. Welcome to everyone who's here today. I'm Kimberly Stevens, and I believe that God is still alive and well, changing lives in this world today. And if you know anything about my story, I've written an entire book of moments where God showed up and changed my life. And I coined the phrase altered moments because when God does change us, we are never the same. And he does that through moments throughout our lives. And today, I'm really excited to welcome a very dear friend, Zena Krogedal. Zena, welcome.
Hi, Kimberly. Thanks for having me.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who is listening live. And whoever listens to the replay, we welcome you as well. So today, Zena is going to tell us one of her altered moments. And I'm very, very excited to hear that. But let me tell you a little bit about Zena. Zena, like I said, is a dear friend. And I'm going to read some of this so that I get the details correct. But Zena is a speaker. She's a coach. She's a real estate sales agent, and she's also a dental hygienist by former trade. She's a woman of multi-talents. She's a certified business and life coach. She's been trained by some of the best, including Michael Burt and Tim Storey and Ken Walls. And she brings 26 years of professional experience into her coaching and to her business. And Zena, I'm going to let you tell us, what do you think is the most important thing that you would want our viewers to know about you today?
Oh, thank you for that introduction. You are so sweet. And first of all, Kimberly, I have to say that I just thank God so much that he brought you into my life and into being able to call you friend. And so I just wanted to just give that declaration out on the internet for the whole world to hear how grateful and thankful I am for you. What I would love people to remember me by and know about me is that I am a woman who has survived and thrived through many challenges in life. And so I live each day in victory. No more of the victim mentality. And I believe that everyone can absolutely harness their challenges in life and really propel and live in the purpose that God has designed them to be, because there's no greater place than living in the purpose that God has assigned into your life. And everybody's seeking for purpose and trying to find it.
Yes.
Really, the reality is that we don't really need to find it because it was never lost. Our purpose has always been with us from the very beginning. God gave us our purpose before we were even formed in our mother's womb. We just have to yield to it. And so that's what I hope that people will remember about me, is that I'm a woman who is yielded and on a mission.
I love that. Something that I was reminded, I knew prior, but I was reminded of this when I read your bio, is that you actually came here from Vietnam in the 1970s.
Yes.
And if that doesn't speak to who you are as a survivor and a person who thrives, I don't know what else does.
It was a generation of obviously strong survivors and people, because I was just a baby. I actually was born in 1974. I know I'm giving away my age here. I was born in 1974 vintage time. And just a year later, my family ended up in the United States. And my dad, my mom left everything they knew behind and started from ground zero in a new country, new culture, new language, and basically a new baby. I mean, I was just a year old. I can't imagine traveling on a C-130 packed in like sardines with a baby in diapers and with a bunch of people, I just can't even imagine that scene of what that must have felt like for my parents. So absolutely, it is an incredible resiliency that my parents both had and instilled in me. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
That's amazing to have that at such a young age and to be able to draw back on that strong victory and celebrate with your parents for nearly all your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my mom, she was, I believe, about 29, and my dad was 30 when they came to this country. And my mom didn't really speak English. Now, my dad did. He spoke it a little bit because he worked at the U.S. Embassy as a chauffeur for one of the lieutenant colonel's officers. And so, so he knew English and he had been learning. But my mom, she didn't really know English. And so I have to say, looking back, I give her a lot of kudos that she took and made the effort to learn English, even though we were in a community that was not full of Vietnamese. I grew up in Flagstaff, which is a hippie town. And there's very, very low Asian population. Like there probably was only about 3 families that were Vietnamese in that town. And even that they kind of came and went. People did not stay in Flagstaff at that time. And yet my
Wow.
mother learned English. And I love this because my mother's best friends were Hispanics. And so the English was their second language. And they loved playing cards. So they would get together quite often to play cards. And I have to tell you, Kimberly, it was kind of funny as a child to listen to their conversations, because like I said, each of them, it was their second language. So when they're trying to say curse words, they didn't quite say it correctly. And I used to giggle like, Mom, you're not even saying it right. But but I really, as I grew up, I realized that a lot of my Vietnamese friends that came over, their moms didn't necessarily learn English, especially those that lived in communities where there was a lot of Vietnamese people. And so even now, fast forward 40, 50 years, many of them don't speak English. They only speak
Wow.
Vietnamese, and it's their children that interpret for them. And so as I got older, I realized, wow, my mom really, even though she was hard to understand for most people, she really put in the effort to do something that was difficult. And so, big kudos to her in doing that.
Absolutely. And talk about an altered moment for your parents to bring you all the way to, as you said, a new country with a new language and a completely different culture. That's a pretty big altered moment, I would say.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Very, very much so. Which is, why the American dream is such a big deal for me. I know I talk about that a lot, in my speaking of it, of always dreaming about the American dream. I wanted to be an American kid from the very get-go. I mean, I was raised here and I didn't learn how to speak English. I know you may not have known this either, Kimberly, but English is actually my second language. I didn't learn it until I started school. And
Wow.
because, my parents, again, were just learning English. So um, they weren't teaching me it. They wanted me to learn from those who knew how to speak English because they knew in their minds, this is our home now. We're not going back
Yeah.
to Vietnam. There's no going back. So she's going to have to learn how to speak English. And we don't want her to learn it from us because we're not going to say it correctly. We're not going to teach her the right way. So we're going to allow the Americans who've been here to teach her. And so they waited till I went to school to learn, and knowing that I was a little kid, that I'd pick it up pretty quick. So yeah, English is actually my second language. And I remember going to ESL classes, is what they called it then, English as a second language. And they would just put flashcards, right? They just put up flashcards of an apple or flashcards of that. And so I learned visually, and audibly, how to speak. And of course, I don't even remember, because my memories don't go back to when I didn't speak
Yeah.
English, but I do remember the ESL classes, and I did lag behind the other kids because reading comprehension, I always was so far behind all the other students, and I did not test well on reading comprehension even up into my adulthood. And I used to get so frustrated because I'd excel in so many other areas, but reading comprehension was just not one of them. But it was because I was a little bit behind the curve when all the other parents were reading stories to their kids. my parents weren't reading literature to
Yeah.
me because that just wasn't happening. Yeah.
Yeah. It's another altered moment. And, it is amazing to go back to what you were saying is when we are living in our purpose, that we do have many moments, many altered moments where God changes our lives and we are never the same. In this instance, you're speaking English fluently and beautifully, and no one would ever know. And it's pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing. God is very amazing for sure.
So tell us a little bit about your altered moment that you're going to share. Like, give us a little context. Like, where were you? How old were you? What was going on in your life?
So yeah, I had to kind of really narrow down which altar moment did I want to talk about because like you've already mentioned, there's been so many. But the one that was probably the most significant, and by the way, thank you everyone that is joining us live. Really appreciate you being on here,
Hi,
Dan
Bonnie.
and Dan and Bonnie. Thank you. So the one is when I hit the age of 27. I had married my high school sweetheart and dated him for quite some time, and then we got married and had 2 children. And my American dream just kind of came crashing down. I had even purchased my first home, graduated from college, purchased my first home at the age of 22. Things were going pretty well from the outside looking in, family, house, career. And I found myself in a divorce. Things did not work out. And unfortunately, it just the circumstances just did not work for the marriage to continue. And I found myself in a place where I was really rock bottom. I had to file bankruptcy. So not only did I get divorced and I had to file bankruptcy, here I was thinking to myself, my father and my mother did not come to this country for this to happen to me. Like I just felt like the biggest failure, uh, up until this point. And so what had happened prior to this is I grew up knowing God. I grew up Catholic, and I absolutely knew who He was on knowledge base, but I didn't know who He was in my heart. So it wasn't until this moment that I was my rock bottom that I came to really have to lean on God for the next step. So at the age of 27, I did not imagine myself failing like this. And then having to tell my parents was really, really tough.
I bet.
But
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it was really tough. But parents, they're just not stupid. Right? They know more than you think they know. Because I did not talk about how the things how bad my marriage was. I didn't talk about any of that because I'm the type of person, unless you're willing to do something about it, the whole world does not need to know your junk. Like there's no sense in talking about it unless you're actually at a place to do something. And so I just did not tell my parents about all the issues that were going on. And so anyways, when I finally got the courage to tell them, I remember my mom saying to me, he's been doing drugs, hasn't he? Like she knew.
Oh,
And I said,
wow.
yes, yes. And she said, well, I know that we raised you to stay married once you're married, but you have children to think about. And she said, and so we understand and we love you and we're here for you.
Mm.
And I can tell you that my mom was not always, she did not always appear to be reasonable to me growing up. Okay. My mom was not always of,
Parent.
yeah. And so in that moment when she said those words, there was so much comfort in my spirit. Like, oh my gosh, if my mom and dad can forgive me, then maybe God can forgive me. Because the Catholic guilt was strong. I'm thinking, oh, God is never going to forgive me. I'm going to hell for this. All of these things went through my head.
Oh,
But yet, for those who have been, in relationships that are very, very, very difficult that people shouldn't be in, I was at the point where it's like, well, I would rather live alone, knowing God was disappointed, than to live in this hell. I remember thinking that. Now, I want to emphasize, though, at this moment, I did not have that strong relationship with God at that moment. It was just all knowledge based. Yes. Oh, Bonnie, yeah, it's hard to get divorced so young, and you're thinking because you know nobody gets married thinking I'm going to get divorced. We get married thinking this is the person we're going to be with forever and ever. We're going to make it work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So at this moment, I felt the draw to start going to church. I mean, I had 2 children, and my husband, my ex-husband at that time, didn't allow us to go to church. He kind of had his own thoughts and beliefs. I mean, he read the Bible, but he also smoked pot while he read the Bible. So anyways, he had some weird things that
It was
came.
a different interpretation.
It was a very different interpretation. So we were not allowed to go to church. We were not allowed to celebrate the holidays. There were so many things that he just had rules about. And so anyways, the first thing that happened was I put the kids in their car seats and we drove around. I'm like, okay, we're going to church today. I must have driven around 6 different parking lots. And yeah, just because I'd be like, oh no, I don't think we're supposed to go here, or I missed the time or whatever. And I ended up pulling into the parking lot of Calvary Chapel of Prescott. And I'm going to say, Kimberly, this was the last place I thought I would be, because at that time in 2002, this was the biggest church in the area. And in my mind, I thought, no way they're teaching the truth, because there's too many people there. And I had my own weird ideas too. If you can imagine, I wasn't in fellowship, hadn't, and so I'm like, there's no way that this is the church that I'm supposed to be at. But yet I was drawn to pull into the parking lot and go in. And then I thought the next week, I'm just going to go to another church. I was going to church shop.
Yeah.
Well, long story short, I didn't church shop. I just found myself driving to that parking lot each time I went to church. But I also have to tell you that I wasn't consistent in the beginning, because I was very broken, and obviously coming out of a marriage that you have a lot of emotional battles going through, that there's a lot of worthiness type things that you have to battle through. And so anyways, I'd wake up depressed and didn't go to church. Or if I got asked out on a date, I'd go on a date, because at this point I'm like, I married my high school sweetheart. I never dated. So, okay, let's go. But there came a moment where God was just really grabbing my heart and said, it's time to get serious. And you need to start making a decision here. And I remember I went to church that day, and right after church service, I went straight up to the senior pastor and I said to him, I haven't been coming to church very consistently, but I've made a decision. I'm going to come now. I've been going through a divorce, and I've been depressed, and I make all sorts of excuses, but from today on out, I will be here no matter what, unless my kids are sick or something, but I will be here. And when I walked away, I thought to myself, why did I go up to the senior pastor of all people to go and say that to? Why did I go say it to the senior pastor? Because now he's going to be looking for me. Right? So obviously God was working in my heart, and fast forward some more, just a few weeks later, he would give an altar call every day, every Sunday. Like, he's one of those pastors that every Sunday, without fail, he would give an altar call. Well, for 3 weeks straight, Kimberly, I'd be, okay, I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to raise my hand. And then I chicken out.
Love this.
Yes. And then the 3rd week, before I went to church, I said, today's going to be the day. Today's going to be the day you're going to raise your hand. And so I'm waiting. I don't even remember what he preached on that day, because I was just waiting for the end, Kimberly. And here is the interesting thing, how God just knows you so well. And I just told you that he pretty much gives the altar call just about every time that I had been there. Well, this Sunday, he didn't.
Oh my gosh. I'm already crying because you're telling me you're about to go to the altar, and I'm already crying, and then it didn't happen.
Well, but I think the Holy Spirit must have known I would have backed out again. So he didn't. So what I did was I took myself to the prayer room, because I knew, okay, there's people in the prayer room. So so I was obviously determined. God probably knew, for whatever reason, that altar call wasn't going to be it, but that I had to go walk that decision in a different manner. And even then, Kimberly, I was in this denial. My pride was like, I'm not getting saved. I'm just recommitting my life. because even like that Sunday evening when I came back to church, one of the pastors came up, "Hey, I heard that you gave your life to the Lord. That's so awesome." I said, "Oh no, I didn't give my life to the Lord. I'm just recommitting my life." And I look back and I think that is so funny how our pride works. But God just did an amazing work in me, Kimberly, because from that moment on, there was a transformation that was happening to me from the inside out. Like the renewal of my mind was happening at a pretty fast scale. Like things that I thought were true and that I had come to conclusion of, suddenly I didn't think those things anymore. As I got into his word, as I sought him in prayer, as I sought his voice and was listening and finally starting to obey, things started to change. And so I got baptized a couple months later, and about 2 weeks later, one of my patients, you had mentioned I was a dental hygienist. So one of my patients said, I actually didn't know her that well. I had actually just met her one time, but we had a really amazing conversation. I swear my patients gave me a lot of therapy. I got a lot of free therapy through many of the patients' interactions. But anyway, I had talked to her about, my recent divorce and how I was just in a place that I'm just ready to meet people, not really looking for anything serious. Well, she had met Chris because at that time he was doing fitness assessments for the county and she was a probation officer. So 3 weeks later, she calls the office and she says, "Hey, do you remember our conversation 3 weeks ago and how you were saying you were ready to just meet people? Where there's this guy that he does my fitness assessments. He's done it the last couple of years. And he really reminds me a lot of you. Like he has a very similar personality to you. He just moved to the area. I told him about you and I told him about your kids. If nothing else, maybe you guys can be friends. Can I give him your phone number?" And I'm like, sure. So that was Chris.
Amazing.
And
Chris is your
my husband now. And we're about to celebrate
20 years.
Yeah, 20 years tomorrow.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it is amazing.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you. And so, yeah, it was just so amazing, how God works all those details out. Because it turned out that Chris had been raised a Christian all his life and very steadfast. So he actually asked me, "Are you a Christian? What church do you go to?" Well, it turns out, Kimberly, we went to the same church and we didn't even know it.
Oh my gosh.
So we always say that God set us up on our date, because had we just passed each other in the hallways or something, I don't think we would have gone out, because to be honest, he wasn't my type and I wasn't his type. So I don't think, unless somebody had prompted that, that wasn't going to be the case. And so, yeah, a year and a half later, we were married. He fell in love with my children. I think he fell in love with my kids actually before he fell in love with me, but I don't blame him because the kids were pretty darn cute. So, but Kimberly, this was an altered moment, because in this moment of hurt, I gave my life to the Lord and life absolutely changed. And for the first time, I was seeking him on every step that I was making and being totally transformed. But I also knew getting into this marriage, and I knew that God had placed Chris for me, because I was hesitant. I mean, let's be honest, when you get out of a rough marriage and you have kids, you hesitate. Like, do I really want to get back into this? And yet God kept reassuring me, it's going to be different because you now know me and he knows me, and you both have me in your life as the center. And I'm going to teach you how to have a honorable and thriving marriage. And so Chris and I were committed to having a great marriage from the very beginning. And I do believe that that is the reason why 20 years of marriage, we can absolutely say that we love each other more today than we did the day that we said I do. So that's where we're at right now.
So you have a huge day to celebrate tomorrow.
Yes.
And I think that's really important, to stop and to acknowledge where God shows up. He changes us. And when we remember his faithfulness to not only show up in our lives, but to change us and our hearts and our circumstances, that when we stop and say thank you to God for doing that, we open the door for him to continue to show up in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been an amazing journey and an adventure. I mean, I'm not going to say that it was all peaches and cream. Oh, thank God. Dan, you're pretty awesome yourself, so thank you. It wasn't all peaches and cream, but what we did do was we were committed, and we were committed to learning tools and strategies, to being able to navigate through the conflicts and to harness the differences. And so we made sure that we signed up for conferences, we read books, we watched YouTube videos, we did whatever it took to learn how to have a thriving marriage. And then, of course, Kimberly, you throw in, fast forward some years later, then we end up going into business together as a real estate sales agent. And that's a moment that, is defining as well, because when husband and wife are working
Absolutely.
together.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Being partners in life is very different than being partners in business.
Yes.
Very
yes.
different.
And not all couples are meant to be partners in business. And not all partners signed up to be a partner of somebody who owns a business. And so, which is why when you look at the screen here, I've got Partners to Powerhouse, which is why Chris and I really felt in our hearts that there is a mission field out there to really help other couples who are entrepreneurs. So whether it's one spouse that is the entrepreneur or both spouses that are the entrepreneur, it honestly throws in a whole different dynamic. Marriage in itself is already challenging, but you throw that in, and it really can be a doozer. And there are many failed marriages for entrepreneurs because they just don't know how to navigate the two. And so it's very important to us to just continue, because marriage is important to God. It was the first institution that God had established before he established governments, before he established family, before he established anything. Marriage was the first institution, and the enemy from that very moment has been trying to destroy it. And he's been doing a pretty good job over time, destroying
Absolutely.
marriages. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
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 So I actually have a friend, and I'm hoping she's listening. She is about 30 and in a very similar situation to what you described when you were 27 and you decided for the first time to go to Calvary Chapel. And she's feeling all the same feelings. It's uncanny because we just had this conversation last week and we both cried as she was telling me. And what advice? What would you say to her right now, knowing that you saw God's faithfulness and you saw him lead you through these dark days?
I would say that lean into God like you haven't leaned into him before, and get yourself plugged into a fellowship and start really drinking the living water. Drink the living water. That is first and foremost. If I could have done it all over again, and as much as I love Chris and God works everything out and he has been a fantastic husband, I would have done that first before filing for divorce, because I didn't even give it the opportunity, the full opportunity. Now, the results may have ended up being the same, but I watch many women go through this and they think, well, if I just leave this husband and I get a new one, it's going to be better. I just need a new husband because that's the problem. It's the husband. But I'm going to say something that's really hard. I'm going to say something that's really hard to hear. Because even though my ex-husband had a lot of deep issues, and even though he was an addict, it didn't release me of the things that I had contributed in that relationship. There were things about me that was very unhealthy that attracted that to begin with. There was things about me until it was healed, I would not be able to have a healthy relationship. And so I want to say, your decision, your first decision, is to lean into God like you haven't before. Learn to hear his voice, and that is through getting in his word, getting in fellowship, and meeting him every day, and having time for that still small voice. Because many times God shows up in a still small voice, not this booming voice, not this burning bush. Many times it's that small voice, and if we choose to not obey it, then we're not going to hear it much more. He is a person. The Holy Spirit is a person, and if you ignore him, he's going to back off. He's a gentleman. Lean in like you haven't before. Listen to what he wants to do in your life. Allow him to heal you in the places and let him go deep. As hard as it is, let him go deep and let him heal those aspects in you. And the clarity of what you're supposed to do is going to happen. So one of two things generally happen in this, and I've seen this in relationships. One of two things happen. If the husband isn't ready to come to counseling, or or the wife isn't ready, but only one person is, if the one spouse takes that first step and leans into the Lord and allows the healing, then we show up very differently. Oh, hi, Stephanie. Thanks for being here. So if we show up differently to our spouse and speak to them differently and see them differently, and things can shift and change in that household. I know many times I've had to do that even with Chris. Like I said, it's not all peaches and cream just because you marry the right person. It's two sinners coming together trying to live in the same household. So,
Right.
yeah. So that would be my advice. I know that was kind of a long-winded one, but
I love this. I know that there are people out there who are struggling with this exact same issue right now.
yeah.
And if you know them, share this out. Let them hear Zena's story. And Zena, we're almost at the bottom of the hour. Do you have any final words of wisdom or final comments that you want to leave us with?
Well, what I would love to say, Kimberly, I am so blessed that you decided to start this podcast. Watching you grow and just thrive is just such an awesome thing. So thank you so much for having me on here. I feel very honored that you
I'm
asked me.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And but what I want to leave with you is you don't have to go any of this alone.
Mm.
I'd love to chat with you, get in contact with me, because I have been on that road and I do understand. And I have learned some tools and strategies that I would love to help you with. And just remember, it's not my way, it's not your way, but it's Yahweh. you know? So it's and honestly, when you are living in your purpose, when you have yielded to what God has already purposed in your life, he's already created your destiny. It is an amazing place to be. So even within a not so great relationship, you can still find so much joy and happiness because you are thriving where you're supposed to be. And like I said, and God will bring that clarity to your direction. So don't go it alone. Don't feel like nobody can understand or nobody can relate, or you don't even want to talk about it because it's embarrassing, because it is. I get it. Having a failed marriage isn't something that, you're really proud of, but don't go alone.
Amen and amen. And thank you for sharing your altered moment. And if you're tuning in today and either live or on the replay, again, thank you so much for joining us. But what I want to say is if you need an altered moment in your life, just ask God for eyes to see and ears to hear where he's showing up in your life. And that is a conversation that he promises to enter into with you. And just asking for eyes to see and ears to hear nearly guarantees that you will see and hear him in your life. And with that, I have tears now. And I just want to say God is alive and well in this world, and he is in the business of changing lives. Altered moments still happen. They happen to me. They happen to Zena. They happen to every other person who's been a guest on the show, and they can happen to you. And if you need a little bit of hope in your life right now, and you're not a reader and you don't want to read a book, a really simple way to bring some hope into your life is to tune into my website. And if I can find the right banner here, we'll get this. You can go to my website, KimberlyJStevens.com, and there's a playlist. And it's 4.5 hours of music that point us in the direction of hope and guide us to inviting God to bring us an altered moment and to give us eyes to see and ears to hear. And with that, the next altered moment is not today. We just had that one. So the next altered moments is actually Friday, Good Friday at 4:30. And that's a very important day, as we know, in the Christian faith. So we'll be talking a little bit about that as well. And until next time, thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful week.